Fight for the unborn. 2 states celebrate pro-life victories while the White House advances an abortion agenda. Behind the warrant. The latest details on the FBI search of former President Donald Trump's Florida estate. Taiwan in straits. Analysis of ongoing tensions between Taipei and Beijing. And on the Jordan's banks, how current weather conditions are affecting the biblical river. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, August 18th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Eric Rosales in for Tracy Sable. Well, the White House is using its online platforms to continue to push abortion access. Even while President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are on vacation, pro-life groups are fighting back with social media messages of faith, hope, and perseverance. Let's check in with White House correspondent Owen Jensen with more. Owen?
That's right, Eric. There is no shortage of White House social media postings supporting abortion. All you have to do is scroll through. At the same time, pro-life groups are firing back online, posting on their own sites unwavering support for pregnant women and their unborn children. At the top of the White House Twitter page, which has 7.4 million followers, a large banner highlighting a site that leads people to find a verified abortion provider. And on the Twitter page of Vice President Kamala Harris, who has 13 million followers, she recently wrote, "In my home state, I convened state legislators, local leaders, and advocates to discuss our fight to protect access to abortion." And how are pro-life groups responding online? Take a look. SBA Pro-Life America just tweeted this. The abortion lobby's plan to spend millions to elect Democrats who back abortion on demand until birth shows just how desperate they are to preserve their lucrative business of killing unborn children and exploiting their mothers. And Catherine Glenn Foster from Americans United for Life earlier wrote, "We know that when people see what abortion does, we turn away from it. No amount of political spending or astroturfing a misinformed abortion movement can change that." Meanwhile, monkeypox. Today, the White House monkeypox response team gave an update.
It's important that we all take monkeypox seriously. And it's critical that we do all we can to keep this dangerous virus from spreading.
And as people get immunized, the Biden administration announces an additional 1.8 million vaccine doses available for ordering starting Monday.
We know that viruses don't care about state lines. They don't wait to spread.
Now back to the online social media battle to save unborn lives. One more example to share with you. Pro-life group Live Action wants people to know that Planned Parenthood has received $8.7 billion from taxpayers since the year 2000. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you so much, Owen. Meanwhile, pro-life laws will remain in force in 2 states. The first in Louisiana, where the last 3 remaining abortion clinics in the state are closing. A tweet from the Louisiana Right to Life is praising the news. The clinics are leaving after a state court ruled Monday that pro-life laws will remain in effect while lawsuits continue. Separately, in North Carolina, a federal judge is allowing the state's abortion ban to take effect. The ruling says an injunction against the law can no longer continue after the Supreme Court's recent decision to strike down Roe v. Wade. The law prohibits abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy. A judge in Florida says he is likely to make public at least part of the document detailing the evidence that led to the recent search of the home of former President Donald Trump. Several media outlets are requesting the release, citing the public interest in the case. The former president has also called for its release. Meantime, sources close to the Trump family say that they may release surveillance footage of the FBI search earlier this month. One family member saying that the films would be made public, quote, at the right time. And joining us now is Joy Pullmann, executive editor of the Federalist. Joy, welcome back. Now, what sort of information will these affidavits actually be able to bring us that we don't already know?
Well, that's a really good question because, I mean, at this point, in American recent political history. I don't think that we can trust the information that the FBI or the U.S. Department of Justice are putting out. I mean, we just watched, the last 7 years of the Spygate hoax being perpetrated against exactly the same political target, President Donald Trump. And during that entire episode, they were selectively leaking. It was proven by government investigators that FBI agents deliberately falsified documents. They lied to secret FISA courts. So these are not reliable agencies that we can trust, even if we do get a full copy of those affidavits. And I think it's very telling that they're fighting the release of those affidavits, but it's really unclear whether that is for political purposes to make it seem like there's something important in there that there really isn't, or whether that's for legitimate purposes.
And what do you make of the Trump's family claim to release part of the surveillance footage of the raid that took place at Mar-A-Lago?
Well, I think it's very clear in this entire episode that President Trump has been the one who's wanting the release of more documents, and that was also the case with Spygate. Because once all of the information was known, it exonerated him, and it was revealed that these agencies are completely corrupt and in need of thoroughgoing reform. And so that continues the president's historic trend towards saying, get it all into the public eye, because whenever these agencies can hide behind national security and claims and selectively leak, partial bits of information, they use it to frame their political opponents.
And switching gears now slightly, let's go to the publication that you recently did in a series of in-person interviews with Päivi Räsänen, the former lawmaker in Finland who was put on trial for tweeting Bible verses, among other things. And what's the very latest of that case?
Well, I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to meet Päivi and her husband when they came to the United States this summer. And I thought, personally, it's just for me as a woman of faith, I really admire the stand that she has made. And then I learned from interviewing, I asked her a lot more about her personal story, how she came to be in this position, because I do think it's interesting to try to kind of learn how God prepares people to be in the public eye in such a position. So Päivi's case is one that is very likely to have international implications. It's likely to go to the European Court of Human Rights. And it's well known that LGBT activists work across international lines to kind of copy and paste both the strategies and the kind of words that they use. So the case against her is really a telling look at where the LGBT international legal and political movement wants to go, and that is very clearly criminalizing both speech and the expression of religious faith, which historically have been rock solid, actually, the foundations of our natural rights that ensure the equal rule of law and equal rights for every single American citizen.
And your story, the Federalist story, actually made her a star. What do you mean by that?
Well, we've been noticing a very interesting dynamic, and this is historic to the church as well, that persecution and martyrdom not always, but very often has the opposite effect of the intended persecutors. The Bible puts it this way, something that some intend for evil, God uses to bring about good. So I've also been very heartened and inspired to see that happening in Päivi's case, and honestly, to learn from, watching with her, interviewing her, and looking into her story deeply. What a woman of integrity she has been behind the scenes, and how she and her husband's strength and their family commitment to each other and their prayers for each other have really enabled her to withstand really international attention, as both hostile as well as, we've seen the Christian church working across international boundaries to support her case, both financially and with prayers all across the world. So it's fun to see kind of a modern day saint persecution hero story happening right in front of our eyes. And that's part of the reason that I've really been interested in watching what happens with her case.
Yeah, most definitely. Our prayers go out to her. And what other stories are you currently following right now?
Well, if you're looking for what I'm working on right now, actually is a look into the politicization of the public library system. So I've been talking actually with networks of people across the United States, noticing, that especially during the lockdowns of COVID, kind of seem to have enabled public libraries to purge a lot of their old and classic books and then replace them with politically correct, really actually not just politically correct, but overtly offensive. I would characterize it as pornography for children books. And so there are people who are seeing this and are taking action. And that's what I'm working on right now and writing about the sort of ways that they have been alerted to this happening and they've decided to take a stand about it.
Well, thank you so much. Joy Pullmann, executive editor at the Federalist. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
A successful rescue operation saves 9 coal miners today in central Colombia. Crews worked for hours to free the crew following yesterday's collapse. There's no word yet on the cause of the accident. Now, there are reports that the mine may have been operating illegally. Ukrainian officials say Russian missile strikes killed at least 17 people in the Kharkiv region overnight. Dozens more were wounded, and explosions rocked a 3-story residential building. Russia claims that they were actually targeting foreign mercenaries. Turkey's president and the United Nations chief traveled to Ukraine today to meet with President Vladimir Zelensky. They wanted to boost grain exports and secure Europe's biggest nuclear power plant, which is located in Ukraine. But little progress was reported in the high-stakes bid to ratchet down the war. The president of Ukraine also made a virtual appearance yesterday in Chile. He was invited to the event organized by the Catholic University there. President Zelensky told the teachers and students that they should know the truth about the war in Ukraine and support sanctions against Russia. Russia is reviving a recognition for mothers who have families of at least 10 children. It's called Mother Heroine. It began after World War II, when then the Soviet Russia suffered 42 million casualties. President Vladimir Putin made the decree this week, offering some $17,000 per mother as an incentive to increase birth rates. Coming up, a dire announcement about pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong. Plus, no let-up for international tensions between China and Taiwan. We have analysis. Welcome back. Hong Kong authorities say 29 of the 47 pro-democracy advocates have pleaded guilty to violations of a Beijing-backed national security law. The charges are tied to support for opposition candidates during the unofficial primary election in 2020. The group includes 2 high-profile activists, Joshua Wong and Benny Tai. The defendants could receive sentences of life in prison. The United States government is set to hold trade talks with Taiwan. The discussions are a sign of the U.S. support for the self-ruled island. The announcement comes aimed increasing tensions between China and Taiwan. In China, a government official warned the United States not to sign the trade agreement, saying that it would, quote, send the wrong signal to those who support Taiwan's independence. And joining us now is Dean Cheng, Senior Research Fellow at the Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. Dean, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, tell us a little bit more about this trade discussions taking place between the United States and Taiwan and the significance of it.
Well, it's long been suggested that one way of expressing U.S. support for Taiwan would be to sign a free trade agreement between the island and the United States, which would facilitate economic relations. Taiwan, of course, is one of the largest producers of microchips in the world, so that would also help. Given that the U.S. chose not to participate in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a regional free trade agreement, it would also be a reminder of American political and economic support for the region.
And China issued a warning to the United States not to sign the agreement. What do you think will happen if the agreement is signed?
I think we will see Chinese harassment of American companies and also of Taiwanese companies, supply chain problems, that sort of thing. For the Chinese, part of the issue there, however, is that with their sporadic COVID lockdowns, they're already proving to be a bad supply chain partner as it is. But I think one of the big things that they will also try to do is really put more pressure on Taiwan, political, economic, as well as military.
And what do you make of all the military exercises currently taking place around Taiwan right now? Should we be concerned about these possibly escalating?
Absolutely. We should be concerned. These are very large exercises, but we should also keep them in perspective. This is exercise season for the People's Liberation Army. Going back over a decade, July and August is when the PLA really tends to hold its large-scale exercises. So this is really consistent with that. But these are very large and involving things like missile overflights of the island.
All right, let's switch gears now. We talked a little bit about what's taking place with the pro-democracy protesters and how they pleaded guilty under this new sweeping security law. What exactly does this mean for these people out there?
Several things. It means that they, as your report noted, may face sentences of up to life in prison. It is political pressure on all elements in Hong Kong that are pro-democracy. It's a warning to them, really. Shut up, sit down, keep quiet, or this could be your fate. They would love to see someone like Joshua Wong basically confess to being guilty so that they could then, quote unquote, be merciful and not give a life sentence. But they would also demonstrate, again, the power of the state to break the individual.
And we showed just some video just a little while ago of all these people in the streets protesting. I mean, this has got to send a clear message to the communist country that they're not happy, correct?
It does, but it's not clear that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, cares. They're going into a party congress later this fall. Xi Jinping needs to look strong. And at the end of the day, Hong Kong is a small and fully subordinated entity to China. And in fact, the more the Chinese can break individuals and groups, the more it sends a message to all of China. The CCP is in charge. Make no mistake about that.
Let's take a look at the war in Ukraine. I mean, we're looking at China possibly going to help the Russians out there. And is that still a possibility that we can expect?
I think we need to keep this in perspective. So far, what the Chinese have done is they have bought Russian oil, they've bought Russian grain. But there's no indication at this point that, for example, they are selling weapons. And certainly there's no prospect at this point, I think, that anyone thinks that the Chinese will send Chinese people's volunteers, as they did in Korea, to fight alongside the Russians. So this is political support, to a lesser extent economic support, but it's not yet military support.
Okay, but I mean, just the same way that we're helping out with military support, they're helping out in the buying of oil and grain and things like that, correct?
Absolutely. They are giving Putin a significant amount of economic assistance simply by buying oil and grain.
All right. Well, Dean Cheng, thank you so much for joining us, Senior Research Fellow at the Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, how a drought is drying up the waters of a biblical river. Plus, how Christian charity is reaching the greatest humanitarian needs worldwide. It's a significant body of water, not just because it borders between two Middle East countries, but also because of its biblical history, including the baptism of Jesus. The concern today is how to improve the water levels and cleanliness of the River Jordan. The lower Jordan flows southward from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea. Several factors have reduced its levels and increased pollution, including climate conditions and water diversion. Well, last month, Israel's government approved a rehabilitation plan to restore capacity and cleanliness after decades of neglect.
This is the first most important plan to revive a river in the last 20 years. The last time we had such a big project was in the restoration of the Al-Qon River in Tel Aviv, in the central of Israel.
The Water Authority says the new project plans to substantially increase the volume of water flowing from the Sea of Galilee within the next 3 years. Medair is a Swiss-based humanitarian organization inspired by the Christian faith. In more than 30 years, the group has worked with nearly 40 countries to help millions of vulnerable people. Medair delivers humanitarian and helps people recover from conflicts and natural disasters. The organization is a recognized humanitarian NGO with more than 1,500 team members. And joining us now from Ukraine is Damon Elsworth, Senior Global Emergency Response Team Officer at Medair. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us more about your work in Ukraine over the last several months?
Hi, Eric. Yeah, good to join you this evening for your listeners. I first entered Ukraine in early March. It was a very different situation then as it is now. Right now, we're seeing a huge amount of a kind of settling in the west, in the central areas, but then there's continued conflict and flashes, missile attacks in the east and in the southern areas. There's all sorts going on. We're doing our best to support vulnerable communities in rural areas and in the cities, but there is a big sense that this conflict is really just getting started. So Medair, we're a Christian non-government organisation, and we're working in sectors of water and sanitation, health, non-food items, supply of sleeping kits, and basic services like that.
You've also done a lot of work in Afghanistan. A year ago, the Taliban were taking over Afghanistan, and another area where there is a major crisis. And what is the situation there and how you're operating in that country?
Yeah, we've got teams working all over Afghanistan at the moment. We were able to continue programming right the way through the conflict. We've actually been there since 1996. And over the past year, we've been able to reach a lot of communities, both historic communities and also open up programming in new areas. I understand that a lot of the issue was when the foreign communities were there, access to these vulnerable groups was very difficult, but now there's a change in power. Actually, access within the country has somehow improved a little bit. There's enormous food shortages. Cost of food has increased significantly, and we're working to support a lot of health clinics with medicines, equipment, staffing, and trying to address the malnutrition.
And around the world, conflicts continue and emergency situations continue. What are other areas of serious problems where you're focused on right now?
Yeah, that's a big part of my job and our team in the Global Emergency Response Team. Over the past couple of years, we've been responding in Sudan, in Ethiopia, northern Kenya, and ongoing sort of situations in Somalia and South Sudan as well. One of the big things we're looking at now is a global food shortage with the rising price of food, continued drought after several years of short rains. And again, the rains are expected to be short again this year. This is driving up the food prices. And of course, there's the Ukraine situation that's impacting that as well. So this is all impacting, levels of malnutrition that we're seeing, in all of the countries that we're working in.
And besides keeping Medair in constant prayer, what can folks at home, our viewers at home, our Catholic viewers at home do for Medair?
Well, I know that the Catholic community is extremely generous, and I think one of the misconceptions with funding, particularly in the media, is that there's often a big emergency. Last year it was Afghanistan, 6 months or so before that was Ethiopia, and right now, of course, it's Ukraine. Everyone's keen to give, everyone's keen to provide support. But I think what's really important from the humanitarian community is flexibility in support and sustained support. Flexibility in the sense that although this is in the media every day now, actually there's other emergencies in other countries that are going unfunded as institutional funding from governments, from the private sector are being redirected to Ukraine. So actually, Medair, we've had to kind of redesign our global sort of portfolio to try and prop up kind of chronic needs, perhaps in countries that are receiving less media attention. As Ukraine. So I think sustained support is one thing that would be a huge help, and flexibility and support. Yeah, those are two of the big things.
Well, you're definitely doing the hands and feet of Jesus out there, and thank you so much, Damon Elsworth, Senior Global Emergency Response Team Officer at Medair. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Just amazing work there. That organization has helped so many people out there in Ukraine and throughout the world. Well, want to thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Eric Rosales. Have yourself a wonderful night. Good night, and God bless.